Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we are going on a seriously incredible journey. We're going to trace the path of a global tech empire all the way back to its impossibly humble roots. We'll be looking at how a friendship, a tiny backyard space, and a true commitment to innovation completely shaped the modern technological landscape as we know it. Let's get into it.
I mean, think about it. How exactly does a $45 a month rental garage, and get this, a kitchen oven, literally give birth to modern Silicon Valley? It sounds like a myth, right? Or some exaggerated movie script. But this is the strange, absolutely true origin story of a technological giant. Because way before there were sprawling corporate campuses and multi-billion-dollar valuations, there was simply a driveway, a backyard, and a burning desire to build things.
Section 1. The Modern Legacy.
To really appreciate where this story begins, we kind of have to zoom out first. Let's dive into the massive catalog of highly advanced scientific tools that Agilent produces today, which represents the modern legacy of HP. We're talking about analytical instruments like gas chromatography and mass spectrometry, technologies that honestly stretch the very boundaries of scientific analysis. Moving down, you've got life science applications, including next-generation sequencing and cell analysis. And then there are clinical diagnostics dealing with digital pathology and in situ hybridization. This is incredibly complex, high-stakes technology used in everything from biopharma and cancer research to environmental testing. It's just a sprawling, incredibly sophisticated global operation.
Right, so keep all of those advanced, world-changing technologies in your head for a second, and then consider this number, $45. Talk about a mind-bending contrast, because all of that complex, industry-leading tech we just talked about, it originated from a single garage that cost just $45 a month to rent. It's almost impossible to wrap your head around that kind of return on investment, but it is 100% true.
Section 2. The House on Addison. Let's actually rewind a bit and look at the property itself. Built right around 1905, 367 Addison Avenue's first resident was Dr. John Spencer. Now, he wasn't some tech pioneer. He was a San Francisco physician who had actually studied disease transmission under Louis Pasteur over in Europe, and he later became Palo Alto's very first mayor. The house itself was just a solid middle-class structure built in the American four-square style. That basically means it was plain, honest, and boxy, kind of like a reaction against the overly ornate architecture of previous eras. Later on, between 1919 and 1920, the Spencers spent about $2,000 to divide their large house into 2 apartments. But here's the thing, the real magic didn't happen in that main house. By 1924, a small 12 by 18 by 8-foot garage and a tiny 12 by 18-foot shingled cottage had been added to the rear garden. Following Dr. Spencer's death, his widow Ione Spencer lived upstairs and rented these little spaces out. I really want to point out that the actual birthplaces of the company were these unassuming little rear garden additions. Nothing grand at all, just a couple of small wooden structures behind a house.
Section 3. Friends in a Garage.
Because a garage is just a garage without the right people in it. And the 2 Stanford grads who moved in as renters in 1938 were just a brilliant study in duality. Dave Packard grew up in Colorado. He was a star athlete and a star electronics student. On the flip side, you have Bill Hewlett, a San Francisco native. Bill had tons of heart but very little athletic talent. He was actually considered a pretty mediocre student, but he possessed this remarkable, almost intuitive knack for mechanical things. They were total opposites in so many ways. Dave the star, Bill the mechanical genius, but they became super close friends, bonding over trips to the mountains in Bill's car. Dave and his wife Lou rented the downstairs apartment for that famous $45 a month, while Bill lived out in the garden cottage.
So what actually turned this friendship into a massive business? Well, we have Fred Terman to thank for that. He was the dean of the engineering school at Stanford, and both young men had taken his classes. Professor Terman's radio lab and his habit of taking students out on field trips to visit local entrepreneurs' labs deeply inspired Dave and Bill. It was really Terman who brought these 2 opposites together and continually pushed them to just go for it and start their own business.
Now, what's absolutely wild to me is the sheer oddity of their early hustle. The garage became their think tank, their lab, their office, the whole production department. But they didn't really have a product yet, so they just took whatever random contract work they could get their hands on. We're talking lane signaling equipment for a bowling alley, a motor drive for a telescope at the Lick Observatory, a self-flushing toilet. I mean, they even built audio oscillators to tune harmonicas, and incredibly, a shock exerciser that zapped people with electric impulses to give them workouts while they were just sitting down. No way, right? During this crazy period of just throwing ideas at the wall, they were practically surviving on Dave's wife Lou's $90 a week income. They were trying literally anything to see what would stick.
Section 4. The first big break.
Thankfully, something finally did stick, shifting them from those quirky odd jobs to a genuinely scalable product. By combining Bill's knowledge of circuit technology and Dave's manufacturing skills, they built an audio oscillator that seemed to have actual market demand. They called it the 200A. And I have to highlight the incredibly charming, do-it-yourself nature of their manufacturing process here. To build the case for the 200A, they actually used Lou's Wedgwood stove right in the kitchen to bake and dry the paint on the metal casing. It is the literal definition of a startup operating out of a kitchen and a garage.
They priced this first 200A audio oscillator at $54.40, which, it turns out, was shockingly low. In fact, it was so low that when they learned their competitors were charging 10 times as much for similar equipment, they quickly realized, okay, we need to raise our prices to accurately reflect the value of what we're baking in this kitchen oven.
So, armed with a list of potential customers supplied by their old professor Fred Terman, Lew typed up sales letters right on the dining room table. And that leads to my absolute favorite historical Easter egg in this story. One of those letters landed on the desk of J.N.A. Bud Hawkins, who was the chief sound engineer for Walt Disney Studios. Disney was so impressed that in 1938, they purchased 8 of these 200A oscillators at a slightly bumped-up price of $71.50 each. So yes, Walt Disney Studios became one of the very first customers of a company that was literally baking its products in a kitchen stove.
Section 5. Expanding the empire. That initial success with Disney was the spark. Tracing their history, it's incredible to see just how fast they scaled their mechanical ingenuity into the computing age. In 1938, they rent the $45 garage. By 1939, they've sold the 200A to Disney. Fast forward to March 1966, and the company is doing so incredibly well, they open HP Labs, a dedicated facility for future-focused research and development. And then just a few months later, in November 1966, they introduced the 2116A. This was HP's first computer, originally developed just to augment their core business and instruments, but it ended up opening an entirely new, massive business avenue for the whole company.
I actually want to pause for a second on the creation of HP Labs in 1966. This division was created specifically to give engineers the freedom to pursue R&D without the pressure of needing to find an immediate path to monetization. Think about that for a minute. Allowing engineers this unstructured freedom to just discover the technologies of the future was a direct continuation of Dave and Bill's own think tank mentality from their days tinkering in the Addison Avenue garage. They managed to scale their culture right alongside their products.
And all of that culture was built on a really rock-solid foundation, a core belief in a responsibility to employees, customers, suppliers, and to society. The crucial takeaway here is that they weren't just building electronics. They were building a lasting business philosophy. They were a team of two who genuinely liked and trusted each other. They were friends first, partners second, and they made sure that those same values of trust and broader responsibility were completely woven into the DNA of the global empire they ended up creating.
So we've seen them go from tinkering with shock exercisers and baking paint in a kitchen oven, to developing the first wave of computing, all the way to paving the way for the massive diagnostic tools of today. Which leaves us with a pretty provocative question. From self-flushing toilets to next-generation mass spectrometry, what global legacy could your weekend garage project become? It's just a brilliant reminder that every massive innovation has to start somewhere small. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope this inspires your own backyard think tank.